All right, what is going on, everybody? We've got obviously a ton of things happening right now with the lawsuit that is obviously coming down on Coinbase. I've got my buddy Mark. We're going to bring in from Not Your Father's Capital. And yeah, lot to get into, man. This has been just crazy day. Long day already. But a lot of things happening. It looks to be pretty good for crypto, though, right now. SEC looks to be getting beat yet again right now, and it's pretty good. DCA Jake's in the house. Anything other than a full dismissal of this case, and we won't be seeing gains until March. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think they are going to probably draw this thing out. That's usually what they do. I've been listening to most of this morning. So, Mark, what are your overall thoughts, man, as we kind of get things moving here?
Well, the consensus is nothing today, right? Nothing today. That's kind of the consensus of what's going to happen. Nothing today. So interested to hear the rest of this.
Yeah, for sure. And here's something that I want to show you guys too, just kind of give you guys a background on everything, and then we'll listen into a little bit of what's going on as well. But right now we've got, this was a great article written out this morning. So basically, there's a couple different scenarios and how this could play out, which we'll highlight here as we go on in the stream. But this came down back in June. And one thing I heard today that was interesting, they singled out these 13 cryptos that you can see right here on screen here. They did say today that the agency said that, these 13 aren't the only 13. They just did a deep analysis on these 13. They really focused on CHZ today, earlier this morning, and kind of made their points there. Basically, their big points were there private investors, right? Were there people who benefited early on, and were tokens allocated to the founders? Those are really their main arguments. It's not really going over well for the SEC right now. And again, a list of these: Solana, Cardano, Matic, Filecoin, Sand, Axie Infinity, Chiliz, Flow, ICP, Near Protocol, and then a couple others that are a little bit down the list there: VGX, Dash, and Nexo. So the SEC has, it says here from a Coinbase team member, the SEC has violated due process, abused its discretion, and abandoned its own earlier interpretations of the securities laws. And I think that's really the big question here is, like, can we be using these old security laws, Mark, that, yes, were once great, right? But this is a whole new asset class. It's very different. And I know there's a separate kind of lawsuit going on with the whole staking side of things. That didn't go well at all for the SEC earlier this morning either.
Yeah, it's just crazy. The wins seem to keep like adding up. And what is it adding up to, right? We all know the XRP trial, as well as what we're seeing from just these precedents that we're setting. But what are we actually setting? That's what it comes down to. It's like, I mean, we're watching some of the posts that we're seeing from inside the courtroom. And guys, it's like one-sided. I mean, it's kind of the SEC just has their hands up because it seems to be like one thing after the other. It's like, what are you trying to do with regulation?
Yeah, well, it sounds like we're having another mic issue. So it's something weird. Every time I use a mic, it does something weird. I don't know when we'll ever get this figured out.
All my stuff is correct.
Okay. I have my mic plugged in now, so that's different. I have my mic plugged in, so I don't know. Should I do echo cancellation? How does that sound, guys?
Yep. Should be good.
How does that? We should be good there. Let me know, guys. Let me know if that works.
Yeah, because I can't hear myself, so it should be good. I think that's what happens is that sometimes it doesn't save it on your end.
Okay. All right. So let us know in the chat here. We'll wait for that. Just make sure. Better. Okay.
All right. So yeah, I can tell immediately. I knew your setting wasn't checked. I think it's because sometimes when you unplug and plug in, it kind of reverts back to your defaults.
Okay. So yeah, we should be good. All good now. All right. Good stuff. Yeah. So we've got some people filing in. If you guys would hit that like button for us, definitely helps us out. I know a lot of people are streaming this. A lot of people listening to Meet Kevin. We're going to listen into his stream too. We tried to call in. We couldn't get in. Mark, I don't know if you want to share with the viewers what happened there. You tried to get into the number, right? They pretty much locked it down.
just full. It's full, but we're gonna keep try to get an exclusive stream here, but we'll get the audio for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. We'll pull that in. And yeah, so a couple things that are happening. We're watching, at least we're watching Coinbase stock, which you can see on screen. We'll be watching Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin's still plummeting here. And if we'll go into the 1 day, I think this is just not financial advice, right? But I think this is a phenomenal opportunity to buy some Bitcoin here. We've been consolidating for the last 5 days here after the big drop. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And as we kind of get there, I'm pulling up what we've got here from Meet Kevin. Let's listen in here and see what they're saying right now.
No rights or obligations part of be an investment term appears in the statute in the case law. The strength of the statements of intent or promotional statements made. The case, at least this branch of the case, boils all the way down. My understanding of my conversations with Mr. Costello is that he believes that Coinbase is just being a bit too literal or too centurion about what that means, and you're not suggesting it needs to be a written contract or a formal document, and you're not suggesting it either. What he's saying is, though, that there is an implicit relationship, an implicit agreement, or at least accession by the participants of the crypto asset in a situation where there's discussion or a lot of, or I guess, white papers and such on the part of the developers to what's going to be done with the crypto asset. I think you're saying to me, unless there's some mechanism of enforcement in all of that really lovely promotional or marketing language, it just doesn't work. Do I understand that correct? Yeah, Your Honor. Even a little more ground because we want to make for purpose of this motion on if the transaction that constitutes the sale of the asset, lease fee, to be meant to convey an enforceable irreducible minimum of what can be conceived to be an investment.
Yeah, so it's just so you guys know, it's hard to understand even just me listening to this right now. It's terrible audio. So we'll try to kind of make sense of it for you guys as we kind of hear some things. So we'll listen to a little bit more of this, and let me know if this gets a little bit better here. Hold on. Let me try something.
And the courts, one after another, said, similar thing. It didn't go off on the investments of others, but rather on common enterprise. It insisted on collateral agreements. Finding none, the Second Circuit rejected the investment contract claim. So we don't think it's fair, reasonable, or sensible statutory interpretation to say you're insisting on too much. When you're talking about an investment contract, look for a contract. SEC has said that. For saying the rules of how we and its logic and reasoning don't apply to crypto. Completely different. It is not we who are willing to faithfully apply. Important. securities to regulate what it does at the water's edge. And if it doesn't, one is asking about for a limiting principle. My next question is what we can talk about as well. You're anticipating my next question. You've lengthy discussions with Mr. Costello and for a limiting principle.
All right. So basically, they're still going on about what constitutes an investment contract. That's kind of what's happening. Okay. I had to turn off and on echo cancellation. That should be better now, right? Mark, you want to try something? Go ahead. We could try to play it through the laptop if you want, but it's bad quality no matter what. Even when you're just dialing.
Okay, although
Let me know if you guys can hear this.
he's at least admitting of the possibility there are some. So yes. So on that limiting, I have a limit. It's just it's rather expensive, but I have a limit. The bigger issue, and the issue with which I was discussing with Mr. Costello, is my concern about this idea that simply looking at the promotional materials of an issuer somehow makes the transaction an investment contract. That purchase with knowledge of or with reading of these materials makes it an investment contract. What I was told, I believe, and he'll tell me in his summation part, is that it's more than that, and there has to be some sense that someone is buying in to the ethos or the ecosystem of the issuer by purchasing that token. Now, that may get them through 12b6. Who knows what happens at the Rule 56 stage? But that's, I believe that to be the limiting principle that I was given. I'll ask you to tell me whether I misheard and whether it's not.
Your Honor, I think you did. We heard the same thing, so okay. I do think that's the Commission's position. That's how we understand it, and we don't think it's enough. We don't think it's enough for a couple of reasons, which I'll try to summarize. The first is we're deeply unpersuaded that it is or has been shown to be an actual limiting principle.
That was good for Coinbase.
The idea that purchasing what is, after all, just an asset, one buys into the ecosystem, can be said about very nearly anything, because nearly every commodity of value, nearly every collectible one can imagine has an ecosystem around it. It doesn't really tell you whether you're in or you're out. And I want to circle back to the question of the conceptual and practical implications of this one. I'm going to jump on that before I shut up, if that's okay, Your Honor. But what I want to say before getting to that is we've offered two limiting principles, and I don't think they're parsimonious. One is that if it's an investment contract, there needs to, at least to be the offering of something that's meant to be a contract. That seems fair. We've also said that a further limiting principle is that the investment needs to be in the business. And I think the Commission allied that point by saying it needs to be an investment in the ecosystem. But I don't know what that means. It means a statement of affiliation with it, perhaps. But let's be clear, at least on the secondary market, which is all we're talking about, Your Honor, no one is giving anything to the promoter. Period. Full stop.
But Justice O'Connor says in Edwards, profits means the profits the investor seeks on her investment and not the profits of the scheme in which she invests. How do you square that with the argument you've just now made to me?
I think it squares well, Your Honor. I want to talk about Edwards a little bit because to state what I'm sure the court is fully aware of. Edwards was a case in which the 11th Circuit found that an investment contract could not be had in circumstances where the investment contract promised a fixed rather than variable return. That created a circuit split.
Right.
It, in retrospect, anyway, is a peculiar holding, given that it's pretty clear that the securities laws reach fixed income investments. So the Supreme Court reversed. The question before the Supreme Court was this: is the profit or the payout that has to be available in the investment contract context, one that is tied to the profitability of the enterprise? And the answer to that question stated that way was no. And the reason was, is even if the Edwards business wasn't terribly profitable, or it was less profitable or more profitable, a fixed return could issue. It was okay to have a fixed return in the context of an investment contract. That's what Justice O'Connor was saying there. I appreciate the pluck from that context that appears to suggest something else, but it is not consistent with the rest of that decision, as I'm sure the court has seen. And I would remind the court that in the Edwards opinion, the Supreme Court went out of its way to say, this is just the way the SEC has been interpreting this all the way along. And, Your Honor, we looked at our second slide about what the SEC told the Supreme Court was going on with an investment contract, including a contract which is an agreement between several parties. And it's really important because Justice O'Connor was saying you can get a payout in an investment contract scenario that is not commensurate with the profitability of the enterprise if the contract is so structured. But it was not saying that the profit or payout could be untethered from the capital structure or invested proceeds in the company's simpliciter. That makes no sense in the context of that case or the long, long line of Supreme Court cases that preceded and followed it.
All right, but I feel like we're talking about two things. You're talking now about tethering to the capital structure, and earlier we were talking about the rights of the putative purchaser to enforce. Help me with that, because I think they are two different things, yes?
They are two different things, though one of the truly fascinating and head-hurting parts of this case is the more you think about them, you see real points of intersection. So, but the answer is yes, they are. There are at least two very distinct ways of holding the problem up to the light to understand how to think about Howey and the contractual provision. And I do think the relevance, the reason, Your Honor, and with apologies, the reason I addressed Edwards in that way is I perceived the question about that statement to go to that issue, but perhaps wrong.
So you've not misunderstood anything that I've said. I just thought it was interesting that we ended with the discussion about tethering to the capital structure when we began sometime earlier with discussion about enforceability. I wonder if you could pause for a moment, sir, and talk with me, not to me, about the decisions this past year from Judge Rakoff and from Judge Torres. And why don't we all just stipulate, lest we be accused of either complimenting or criticizing them unduly, that these are hard issues. And maybe they came out differently, maybe they didn't come out differently, maybe the decisions can be reconciled. But I want to, for example, with respect to the Terraform decision, and in particular the motion to dismiss, I think there was some discussion about the need for some sort of contractual right, and I thought that Judge Rakoff wasn't really feeling it, as it were. But I acknowledge that Terraform is quite different from the facts of this case. Separately, I myself, I'm following Judge Torres' decision, and it's on a very difficult subject matter. Although I think I tripped when I got to the primary secondary market transactions distinction. And when you began your discussions with me by talking about the blind nature of the buys and sells here, I thought I have to remember to ask him about that and how, what importance he ascribes to that distinction that Judge Torres has found in her decision. So that's a very long question. I'll try and do better this time around. Let's start with Terraform. Is Judge Rakoff right or wrong?
Ooh.
I don't know. Agree with meaningful aspects of Judge Rakoff's analysis. There's a big however, which is...
Right, because he then finds, I thought he found that the asset was not itself a security, but the asset was not itself an investment contract, but could be used in an investment contract.
I do think that was part of what Judge Rakoff was saying there, and though we would probably disagree with certain aspects of his holding out of view, when you put the decisions together, the motion to dismiss and the summary judgment decision together, we think even if that motive analysis were applicable here, our motion here would survive. And let me say why. But the Terraform case, first of all, as I know the court knows, did not involve secondary market transactions. There were no secondary market transactions in that case. The SEC went out of its way to tell the court that it wasn't dealing with secondary market transactions. Those were all situations where there was a relationship of privity between the investor and the promoter. It's a very important point of distinction. Judge Rakoff said ultimately in Terraform, and I think I have this right, that no formal contract was necessary to form an investment contract. Fine, we agree with that. What's required in our judgment is a showing that the promoter held out the promise of something meant to convey a contractual promise. But Judge Rakoff does allow as follows, and I think these are his words: an investment contract at a minimum requires the contracting parties to agree or scheme together that the contractee will invest in the contractor's profit-seeking endeavor. Now, that would probably be a point of disagreement between the way we're framing this matter and are litigating it to your honor, and the way we think it's going to be rightly decided in Judge Rakoff, but we can live with his formulation. And the reason is that the SEC in this case hasn't alleged anyone agreeing or scheming together to invest in the contractor's profit-seeking endeavor. The allegations here show no agreement of any kind as between these trades on the secondary market between strangers to invest in any contractor, that is to say, promoter's business. And there's still less is there any kind of agreement that the buyer's payment would be invested in that business. So that's one point I really wanted to emphasize about Terraform. A second is moving to the summary judgment ruling. The texture of that decision seemed to us to be quite a lot different. And while the court did enter summary judgment on the investment contract issue, it did so, first of all, on the basis of recognizing some contractor-contractee relationship, which I just said. And it also went out of its way to emphasize that there were ongoing relationships and obligations with respect to the token. So as to the UST token, which is the dollar denominated, the dollar pegged token, the court relied on the fact that the token could be deposited into the anchor protocol and earn pro rata interest or dividends, thereby demonstrating that that investment was one that was in the ongoing enterprise. As to Luna, the court relied on the representations of the company that the token carried a claim to a distribution of transaction fees, again, proceeds coming from the enterprise to the investors in a relationship of privity. And similarly with the Mirror Protocol token, the court found that it earned fees from asset trades. And so we might have a lot to quarrel about with Judge Rakoff's decision, but the truth is we can live with its analysis because it recognized ultimately that there has to be a contractee-contractor relationship, and there has to be some ongoing engagement with the assets of the enterprise. Nothing like that's alleged in this case, Ron. So that is the way we're holding the Terraform case.
That was strong.
Could you then speak to the Ripple case?
Well, Ripple starts with the correct first principles. Judge Torres says digital assets aren't securities. And then it goes on to analyze whether the various transactions are investment contracts. And there, as here, the question whether a security existed was strictly a matter of investment contract. And what it found, what the court found in Judge Torres' case, was that applying Howey to secondary market trades could not give rise to an investment contract. That was what Judge Torres found. And now, we don't think all the same arguments were raised here as in that case, but the critical takeaway there is that Judge Torres recognized that secondary market token purchases of XRP were not investing in Ripple. And in that sense, it rejected what I think is a core portion of the Commission's argument before the court today, which is its investment in an ecosystem, at least with respect to transactions between strangers where no relationship exists, where no obligations travel. That couldn't be said there, and it can't be said here. Ripple couldn't make any promises to those people because it didn't even know who they were. Same here with each of the 12 tokens at issue. These are blind bid-ask trades. And therefore, as a matter of law, Judge Torres held, and we think correctly on this, investment contract law doesn't apply. These trades couldn't be investment contracts and therefore couldn't be securities. And we think that branch of the whole thing, which was determinative in that case as to the trades that are issued here, secondary market trades, it's a very close cousin of the issue right before the court.
Oh, yes, I understand that, and I think that's probably why the commission disagrees with it so much. The issue here, I'm not disagreeing with your recitation of it. I guess I'm not familiar with, in other aspects of securities laws and other cases that I've had, where the primary secondary market distinction holds so much force, and where the notion or indeed the fact that it's blind bid, blind ask trades matters so much. Am I wrong, or are there other areas of law where it really does, where it has similar import? Here, I just don't remember having to focus on this in other securities cases I've done.
Thank you for that question, Your Honor, which it goes right to the heart of what's interesting about this. So let's talk about stocks. Stock, they trade in blind bid ask all the time, and no one would think to say it's not a security. A stock reflects an interest in the permanent capital of a corporation. And when it trades, that interest in the permanent capital of the corporation, which is a participation in its capital structure, transfers in entirety from one holder to another holder. Attached to a stock are a bundle of rights: inspection rights, right to sue, right to dividends, right to dissolution, all that good stuff. They transfer in their entirety from one seller to the other seller. And therefore, in every case like that, the issue doesn't come up because it doesn't matter who holds it. They hold the same bundle of interests, the same claims against the same entity, insofar as they are just trading interests in permanent capital. Much the same can be said about what trade commonly is notes or bonds. Investment contracts are different because investment contracts are assets stapled to obligations. And the relevant question in every case is going to be whether with the asset travels the legal obligation. You don't need to ask that question in the context of a bond transaction. It does. You don't need to ask that question in the context of a stock transaction. It all travels. These are different, and that's why. And it just won't do, given the requirements of an investment contract, we don't think, to say that it's the same transaction on a secondary market as on a primary market, because whatever may have traveled with respect to the ICO is not likely to travel in a secondary offering. But what matters for our motion, Your Honor, is it's not alleged to have traveled. And no one can say that in the context of a bond or stock sale.
We've had thoughtful discussions for a while now on the idea about the need for a contractual relationship and an ongoing engagement with the assets of the enterprise. I think in another section of your briefing, a distinction that you draw or an argument that you make is that an investment contract must share the essential attributes of other securities. I assume that that's just a variation on the theme, and that what you're saying is, for example, that you have something more than ownership of the asset. Perhaps you have some interest in the enterprise. Perhaps you have something else. But I do want to make sure when you're talking about essential attributes, and that is your argument, is that something different than what we've been talking about? And if so, what are the essential attributes that you think I should be looking for here?
I think what I'd say in response to that question, Your Honor, is first of all, and when looking at the definitional statute provision of the 33 and the 34 Act, the 34 Act, that is relevant, I guess, for the 12 that we're talking about now. There are a list of securities. Investment contract is one of a bunch. And each one of them is an instrument that carries the legal entitlement to the proceeds, assets, or profits of an ongoing business enterprise. core of our argument is that investment contract should be understood to be consistent with that recitation, and that is what, in the words of the statute, makes something commonly known as a security, as opposed to buying the output of what a company makes. It's the difference between investing in Beanie Baby Inc. and buying Beanie Babies. It's the difference between those two things. Additionally, we call attention to the Judge Posner's Walls decision, which I'm pretty confident was picked up in the SEC's briefing in the Edwards case.
We talked about it earlier.
Yeah, and it talks about the essential attributes of a debt or equity instrument. And that it's the same point, we think, but it's something different than the output of a company. It's debt, which is a senior contribution to a capital structure that is put to work by the company, or equity, which is the residual claim that is junior in the capital structure. And the things that are now being forced into the investment contract, we think are different because they play no part in the capital structure and they carry no claims against the ongoing enterprise and carry no contractual rights at all.
That's all I'll say. Thank you.
This is a very interesting argument.
So I think they're taking a break here for a second.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good deal. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I think this is kind of the final or the first point of like contention a little bit, maybe, with what constitutes an investment contract, right? It's like I saw you put in there, Mark, like about the Howey test. Like, are we still going to be using the Howey test? But the judge earlier today was basically like, hey, this thing is old and archaic. We can't be using this to like judge a new asset class. But it'll be interesting to kind of see how this plays out. I'm just sending a tweet out right now if you want to throw your thoughts. I'm sending a tweet. If you guys would hit that like button for us, we're going to try to get some more people in here. I'm going to post this over on Twitter real quick too. So, people know we're here. But yeah, we're listening in everything. So far, it's been a really, really good day. Earlier today, I want to highlight this, Mark, too, real quick. And then want to get your thoughts too. Basically, in listening earlier today, the judge asked, why is Bitcoin so different? Why are you guys already, why have you always looked at Bitcoin as a commodity? And their big response from the SEC was that there's no ecosystem behind it. Moreover, there's no centralized authority behind it. And this is why it's not a security, right? Whereas the 13 cryptos that they highlighted, by the way, those 13 cryptos aren't the only 13 offered by Coinbase that they have an issue with, right? So these ones right here, these were just ones that they said they've done a thorough investigation into. Yeah. This is what the SEC said. Thorough investigation into, and basically called out these 13 for examples. And that, but basically, I want to get into a conversation more or less about this. Okay, so if it is about having a centralized authority, if it is about having an ecosystem behind it, how else can we apply that then for the rest of the market? Are there some cryptos out there then by that logic are not securities? Would you look at Dogecoin, for example? Right?
Yeah.
There's no ecosystem. It's proof of work. I mean, there's no centralized authority per se. Caspa, there is a centralized authority, but is there an ecosystem behind it? I mean, there's a lot of questions here. I don't know where you want to take this or jump in at, but
turn your echo cancellation off. I think you still have it checked on your end.
Yeah, I had to turn it off again. Sorry, I keep going back and forth because
we have to switch with the stream and not.
Okay, is that better now?
Okay. Yep, we should be good because I don't hear any echo. Yeah, no, it's crazy just to think about how this is going down, and the judge clearly has no clue. The guy talking clearly has no clue. And when they get posed with the questions and they're just reverting to the Howey test, they won't talk about the XRP Ripple case, stating different terms. It truly is a goose chase, and that's just really how we're looking at it. I mean, there's too many different categories of crypto. They're trying to generalize it, and we're still spinning circles in courtrooms, wasting taxpayer dollars. Yeah, I think, Zach, you have to click the turn on the echo cancellation.
Oh, I had it on. Okay.
Should be better.
Now you got an echo. Hold on, I haven't done anything yet.
How
about now?
Yeah, it should be good. If they both have to be checked, but when we're doing the broadcast within the courtroom, have to revert it.
Turn it off.
Off. Yeah. So let's the sound come through the laptop.
Give us a thumbs up in the chat if we're back.
We're good. I can hear the echo as soon as it's going down, so we're good. There's no more echo. But yeah, so that's what it comes down to. It's archaic logic. I mean, we're trying to apply a Howey test to something that, it's just so in outer space, and the people talking about it, they still don't even know how to use their iPhones. I mean, and we're trying to have them basically divulge into blockchain. I mean, it's something where we're letting people make these decisions within a courtroom with no expertise. There's people obviously coming out of college, coming out of universities that are called in to advise, to give their expertise and lend their expertise, but those should be the people making decisions. It's just the same reason why everybody thinks, Joe Biden has the key to hit the nuclear buttons. I mean, yeah, but no, he's not making that decision. So we should not let an archaic Howey test, an archaic kind of, not up with the times judge. And I really don't even know who that guy was speaking. I couldn't hear his credentials when he was talking. But he just kept diverting the answers, diverting the questions. And when directly posed with the XRP discussion, completely laid off. And that's really the only legal precedent that we have thus far. So,
yeah, for sure. I think we'll probably go back over here and listen in here in just a few minutes. We want to give you kind of our thoughts, and just to give you guys some background here a little bit. A full dismissal today was on the card. Still a really big long shot. Probably not going to happen. I mean, it's usually not what happens with these kind of cases. They kick the can down the road for sure, at least once, probably twice. But it was on the cards today. We'll see it. I don't think that's going to happen. But Thalia, which is the judge, has opted to proceed with oral arguments. A fairly rare occurrence in early motions to dismiss is promising for Coinbase. And also to note here, this is an important note. This is not Thalia's first case in the crypto realm. She is pretty schooled. I mean, early on this morning, I was listening in. She understood the idea of staking. I think that's really where they stumped the SEC the biggest. Thalia's argument earlier today was an interesting one, Mark. Basically, hey, I'm keeping my money in a savings account in a bank. That money's not guaranteed. Right. And they're offering interest. They're offering interest to me too. Now, albeit it's small, right? But they're offering interest, but there's no guarantee there that we've seen that with regional banks going under. So what's the real argument here with staking? There was none. The SEC got absolutely demolished on that point. But yeah, in August, she dismissed a class action complaint against Uniswap, noting in her opinion that Ether is a crypto commodity. So, Thalia, this is somebody that you're listening to right now who thinks Ethereum is a crypto commodity. So, that should bode well overall for Coinbase here. Thalia also said in her opinion that Congress and the courts have yet to make a definitive ruling as to whether to classify cryptos as securities or commodities. So, also kind of, further giving credence to Coinbase here, because if you're an operating company and now you're a publicly traded company like Coinbase and there are no rules set in place, what are you really trying to get them to do here? I mean, it sounds like it's just a wild goose chase. It sounds like the SEC is throwing rocks and seeing what windows it could break. I mean, that's really what it feels like. And the judge is kind of alluding to that in some of her comments before this whole thing started. So this should bode well, I think, for Coinbase. I can't foresee the SEC winning this case at all. I think it's going to be even a bigger landslide victory than the first portion of the Ripple versus SEC lawsuit was back in July. I really do. And I don't think it's going to take that long either. I mean, that one took 3 years, basically?
Yeah, it's almost like counterintuitive what the SEC is doing. Like, they're trying to introduce all these suits. They're trying to introduce all these arguments and losing. I mean, they're just stacking L's. And
Yeah.
Instead of coming to the table and reaching somewhat of a compromise where they come out ahead, they're really just stacking L's. And yeah, there are a lot of, I just don't get it. I mean, it's, you say what you want. There's the whole security commodity debate, what it comes down to, and who cares? Crypto flat tax. Let the adults be adults. Keep the ill-advised activities out of crypto, and we're going to save a ton of taxpayers' dollars. And just reach something with the European unions, the rest of the global markets, and boom, we're done. We have a solution. You can monitor it. You can have you can have an FBI securities, commodity, or you can have a cryptocurrency division. Just bolster that with the taxpayers' dollars and really just enforce that globally. And it's just flat tax it. Boom. It's all about the money. This
Yeah.
guy's not losing sleep whether or not Ethereum's a security or not. And that's what I mean. It's just a waste of time that we're trying to, it's just and then you can say what you want. A lot of people are into conspiracy theories and, this is just a head fake before the election and yada, yada, yada. Then, like that's how they'll get you. And then we'll start all that. But it doesn't matter because I can guarantee you once Trump's not allowed to run for office again in 4 more years, we're still going to be talking about crypto. It's just a way to achieve leverage. And quite frankly, if we didn't have to do this right now in the courtroom, this guy would be sitting, on his butt, not really doing anything. I mean, it's just, it's
true.
for all for nothing. I mean, make a decision and move on. We have to drag it out. How long has it been? I mean, look at Ripple. I mean, how long they've spent their time in the courtroom instead of building what they should be doing. I mean, do what you're supposed to do. Progress. Work with people. Because you're
Yeah,
still gonna have to
yeah. And on the Ripple side of things, it hasn't hindered them from growing elsewhere. Obviously, they've grown out their bases all across the world now. Their headquarters is in San Francisco. It's hindered their growth in the United States, but what they've done since December 2020, since they got, tied up in the mess, is they've expanded. And they've said, listen, we're not afraid. If we got to move out of the U.S., we're going to go take our business elsewhere. And that's really what it comes down to more than anything, Mark, is the SEC is hurting innovation right now in a burdening, is that a word? Burdening sector, a growing sector, right? So if you look at the United States, obviously we're both from the U.S., so we're biased here. We get that. There's some people out there listening. Okay. But here's the thing. What made the United States so strong over these past decades is they've always been the first adopters, the first movers, the first shakers. Look at the internet. The largest companies in the world, your Googles, your Facebooks, name them, Amazons, they've all been built in the United States. And to me, this is where we're going. This next phase is AI and blockchain. And right now you're stunning innovation. You're hurting the ability to grow and burden. There we go. So basically that was it. I want to listen back in, Mark. Do you still have the audio? I'll drop.
Yeah.
I'll turn my.
Actually, try it without doing that on your end, because I think if I'm running it, I might be able just to do it.
I'm just gonna mute myself though. I can't hear anything if you're playing anything. Might have to turn your stuff.
Library, I think how it's pronounced, is a pure ICO primary trade case. And that's a very important point of distinction. And because it was an ICO case, the matter of the contractual undertaking was much easier to resolve, and there were findings there about the way those proceeds were invested to launch the enterprise. On the subject of our slides, I'll just let the court draw the court's attention to slides 10 and 11, and we think this is really important because we don't think these cases, which have only to do with the ICO context, the initial offering context, the primary privity context, can be imported into the secondary arena. In the briefing, the commission suggests that they stand for the proposition that primary and secondary transactions ought to be viewed in the same way. In every one of these cases, the commission stood up and told the judge, we're not talking about secondary trades, they're different. Each one of them, including, as on the last slide here, 11, you can see that the judge even seemed quite frustrated about it every time he raised the matter of secondary transactions. We're not litigating that here. The commission has to decide that, blah, blah, blah. And then the court said, right? Have I misunderstood your position? No. And so those cases, they're just not opposites here. They concern very different factual practices.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to give you a break, please, if I could turn to your colleague, Mr. Schwartz, to talk about why my discussions with Mr. Margita about wallet and staking were all wrong. Thank you, sir.
Not all wrong, Your Honor.
Okay, great.
Your Honor, we'll start just by saying that there are actually I'll start with wallet if that's comfortable. There are actually very few allegations put at issue in the wallet claim. And as you heard from our friends at the front table, the law is well settled and the parties aren't disagreeing about what it is. We both cited the same 9 factors, and I think there's no real dispute that nearly all of them are absent from the SEC's allegations. They don't dispute that they have been purported to allege the variety of core brokerage activities that are traditionally found by courts, negotiating terms for the transaction, making investment recommendations, arranging financing, holding customer funds, conducting independent asset valuations. None of these core factors are addressed at all, even purport to be alleged. What they do say they allege, and that's what I want to turn to. I mean, as my colleague said, you may find it helpful to look at page 15 in the deck. This just sets out on one slide for you, so you can see the 4 paragraphs in one place that the SEC points to as sufficient pleadings to survive the motion for judgment on the pleadings. We think these fail as a matter of law to support a claim that Wallet acts as a broker. I'll point you to 64 and 82 to start. Those together talk about Wallet routing customer orders through third-party decentralized exchanges. From blockchain developed a swap via wallet comparison across multiple exchanges. What you don't see in these allegations, Your Honor, are any well-pleaded facts showing that Wallet itself is doing any of these activities beyond allowing users access to the third-party platforms who give that functionality, who carry out those activities. And here, Your Honor asked about this earlier, and we want to direct your attention to it indeed. The user agreement, which is incorporated in the complaint by reference, lays this bare. The bottom line that it's not Wallet, but it's third-party platforms that are carrying out the very activities the SEC is referencing. And here, if you turn to slide 16, Your Honor, you'll see the portion of the Coinbase user agreement excerpted for you, setting forth what happens in Wallet. The app or browser provides a link to the platforms. Through the link, users, quote, navigate away from the Coinbase site to the DApp or the DEX. And, Your Honor put it very well in the Uniswap case. Once Wallet provides a technical connection to the third-party platforms, customers then direct the smart contract on those platforms, like the Uniswap trading platform, to take the digital assets out of Wallet and carry out the swaps or whatever activity those exchanges permit. There are no well-pleaded facts to the contrary here, suggesting that these activities occur within Wallet itself. And I'll just add, Your Honor, there was an earlier colloquy about 0x, which is yet another one of these third-party exchanges. It's an information-based protocol that connects up to third-party platforms. That is not within Wallet. It's not alleged to be within Wallet, by the way. My colleagues at the front acknowledge that was noted in a footnote on page 27 of the brief. It was not alleged in the pleading. But I'll hasten to correct it anyway. 0x is one of those third-party platforms to which the Coinbase Wallet user interface connects those users to do activities on a third-party platform. And that's a critical correction or clarification in light of the limits of the pleading and the user agreement that's fairly before the court. Another activity they point to in paragraph 75, you had a discussion about earlier, was solicitation of investors as something that was purportedly alleged. If you look back at paragraph 75 again on slide 15, the allegation is that Coinbase solicits customers by advertising features of Prime platform and Wallet. Advertising to download the software. That's nothing like the findings that courts have made for solicitation of investors for particular investment transactions. That's the broker solicitation courts have addressed in the cases the SEC points you to. Hansen, Martino. In the SEC's brief, those cases are ones that identify as brokers agents of issuing companies who actively targeted prospective investors to raise capital by touting particular investments. None of that is alleged here. And so here again, I think it's fair to consider solely the limits of the allegation and the absence of well-pleaded facts, adding anything of the sort to solicitation of investors to conclude that this too is not alleged fraud activity. Lastly, you had a discussion about 101, the last one listed on slide 15, that Coinbase used to charge customers transaction-based compensation for the activities on those third-party platforms. Coinbase no longer does charge for those activities, but even if it did, it's important to say the courts have been crystal clear, and it's long been true, commission-based payments standing alone do not make brokerage activity. And that's not
they're not suggesting that the commission standing alone would have made Coinbase a broker. They are suggesting that what you say is providing access to third-party DAPPS and things like that. That's what I guess the concern I have.
absolutely true. Yeah.
So the concern I have is you all seem to have a dispute about the facts. I think I'm hearing you to tell me that I can resolve that dispute in this context because the use statements, when compared with the paucity or the abstractness of the commission's allegations, no offense, is enough to allow me to find as you wish me to find. But I think they're saying, not yet, Phelan, you've got to let this go through to discovery.
Yes, Your Honor. I think that's exactly right. With respect to the allegations in 64 and 82 we talked about, paucity, saying that wallet does something through third-party platforms, that something happens via wallet, that the price comparison does. Each of those is the circumstance you just described, where the paucity plus the user agreement gives you ample basis to decide the pleadings don't suffice. But where I'll round the picture is with respect to the solicitation of investors, the only other core broker activity the SEC claims to have even alleged, that on its face does not allege what is understood as a matter of law to be the solicitation of investors and brokers.
I see. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you. Let me just take a note of that.
This isn't.
The SEC has sought to suggest there's an alternative frame or some different version of facts, is by saying the user interface connects and therefore facilitates, it puts these parties together. Again, this is not a fact dispute. As a matter of law, that facilitation or putting parties together does not make brokerage activity. And I'll point Your Honor's attention to a case in our briefing, the Reed case. This is also found in the Foundation Ventures case. But Judge Lyman in the Reed case made clear merely providing information or bringing two parties together to make their own contract does not transform an individual or entity into a broker, even if they receive commission-based payments. At most, it's the activities of a finder, and that is not subject to the securities laws. In that case, the person at issue didn't negotiate the transaction, didn't engage in substantive conversations, give valuation advice, the variety of core activities I mentioned that aren't even purported to be alleged here. And so,
Fair answer, but I think the concern of the commission, and it might be a concern that I share, is to the extent that what we're talking about is how you can implement technology to make things faster, easier, have access to even more entities. There's a concern I believe the commission has that it can't just be that technology obviates a finding that one is a broker, because if what you do, if you do broker-y functions, but you do them through some sort of automated mechanism that you have at your disposal, you might still be a broker. I think that's what the commission is saying. I think what you're saying, and let me just confirm that, is that the allegations that are contained in the pleadings, as amplified or perhaps given further detail by the user agreement, are just not enough. Am I understanding your argument correctly?
I think that's exactly right with respect to those activities that the commission claims to have alleged. And there's no dispute about the variety of core activities they don't claim to have alleged that I mentioned at the outset.
Right. So there are a number of factors that I may consider in determining whether someone is acting as a broker. You're saying they don't allege all 9 or whatever; they allege a couple, and as to those, there are reasons to disbelieve or to view with skepticism the allegations that are made.
Yes, we would say there's reason to find they're not well pleaded to support those allegations.
Okay, thank you. Shall we then speak of staking, sir?
Yes, absolutely.
Are there slides about staking?
You better believe it, Judge. We'll turn your attention. In fact, I hope it's helpful. Slide 17 was designed late at night, bearing in mind and reflecting on the last time we all gathered. And so I'm very glad to give it some attention. Your Honor asked the question, about what's properly before you when it comes to staking back in July. And that's why we thought it might be worth stepping back to frame what is properly at issue in the pleadings when it comes to the staking product. And to be clear, we think there are 3 different reasons, each sufficient on its own claim to be dismissed. But I'm going to start with the investment of money. And let me frame this for you. We've set up here the various provisions from the allegations in the complaint and from the user agreement, which we think suffice to give you the picture of the facts that are relevant for disposing of these pleadings. At the foundation of the blockchain is the need to validate each new block or transaction that's added before it's added to ensure the security and accuracy on a consensus basis. You can see that in paragraph 312. Where staking comes in, Your Honor, is from 2 propositions, again, set out in the sources before you. Number 1, blockchains that use proof of stake to achieve the consensus I mentioned set a fee, they call it rewards, that they pay to token holders to perform this critical validation service. That's set out in paragraphs 312 and 313 of the complaint. Number 2, the users who take on this validation service to put up or stake some of their tokens while they're performing the validation service they get paid for. Paragraph 313 calls these staked assets collateral. Collateral against improper validation and collateral that's held in the protocol while the services are being carried out. For token holders who stake on their own, Your Honor, that's it. It's a fee for validation service for the blockchain, and you can identify that again in the allegations before you, confirmed by the provisions of the user agreement. Some users then choose to subcontract that service to Coinbase. They hire Coinbase to operate the IT to validate on their behalf, and they direct Coinbase to stake their tokens on the blockchain while that happens. Those are the facts from the complaint and the user agreement. And with these in hand, we think you can turn to each of the 2 reasons. We'll start with the investment of money, of why the complaint fails to plead an investment of money under Howey. I'll begin, Your Honor, just with a case that the SEC, emphasized to you, the Rivera case from the Ninth Circuit. The Court of Appeals there said one has to, quote, commit assets to the enterprise in such a manner as to face the risk of loss. And I want to focus on the first part of that. Commit assets to the enterprise to have an investment of money. Sounds straightforward. Without a contribution of assets to the capital structure, there's just no investment. Here, the SEC has made no allegation. There's no plausible claim that they could, that staking customers commit anything to Coinbase in this way. They just direct Coinbase in the normal custodial relationship to make their tokens available to the blockchain as collateral, that paragraph 313 puts it, for potential slashing for error validation, and to provide IT services in connection with it. Now, the sole way that the SEC tries to satisfy this commitment of assets requirement, I'll point you to slide 18 for this, just to put their allegation in front of you. Paragraphs 340 and 341 and repeated elsewhere, is to tell you staking customers tender and just give up control over their tokens to Coinbase. And, here going to your question earlier about, where something is wrong but properly before you to resolve, center stage, Your Honor, this bare allegation warrants no credit and is contradicted by the user agreement. You can see on the next slide, slide 19, section 2.7.3 of the user agreement and the appendix, which establish you, the customer, control the digital assets held in your digital wallet, and Appendix 4 extends this to staking services, whether or not the digital asset is staked. And this is important, in granting a motion to dismiss the Underwood complaint against Coinbase, Judge Engelmeyer addressed the same user agreement. And much as Your Honor described earlier, said where a document is incorporated by reference, the court need not accept contrary allegations in the complaint that seek to elude the facts contained in the incorporated document. His words were, the user agreement checkmated those plaintiffs from adequately pleading their claims. And Your Honor, you won't be surprised to hear, we think you should likewise find the SEC's bare allegations that customers give up control over stake tokens in order to claim there's a commitment of assets. It's checkmated by the user agreement. And taking that aside, there are no well-pleaded facts suggesting that anything about this relationship, this fee-for-service relationship that users have with the blockchain and they subcontract to Coinbase, there is no commitment of assets. There is no contribution of capital by the users to Coinbase's capital structure that could possibly satisfy the investment of money requirement. Your Honor, unless there's a further question about that, is risk. We spent some time in colloquy about risk. And that goes to the second half of the Rivera, of the sentence from Rivera again that the SEC is trying to rely on.
Well, are you suggesting that it's wrong for them to rely on it?
No, I think it's the right case to rely on. It just doesn't help them. Unfortunately, their allegations fall short of that standard of law. And here again, I'll just quote you the back half of what we said. An investor must commit his assets to the enterprise in such a manner as to subject himself to financial loss. And it's not just the Ninth Circuit. The Second Circuit has affirmed that the Supreme Court added this limiting requirement as well. Now, on slide 20, Your Honor, you'll see the handful of paragraphs that the SEC tells you suffice to allege risk of loss from staking. And I'm happy to take you through them. I'll tell you broadly speaking, apart from the conclusory allegation at the top. The first two, 341 and 343, concern blockchain requirements for staking and validation. The bottom two don't concern staking. They're just risks that are general to token holders. Both buckets of these allegations fail as a matter of law to assert risk of financial loss in the commitment of assets to the Coinbase enterprise.
Let me ask you to pause for a minute, sir. I've spoiled myself a little bit by looking at the next slide, it's slide 21, which speaks about the risk of loss and how it's discussed in the user agreement. My reaction to reading the briefing was that I thought that Coinbase argued in a number of ways that the risk of loss was infinitesimal, or that the risk of loss was something that could be addressed or made up for by Coinbase if anybody lost money, or that the risk of loss was the same if you were self-staking, or that the risk of loss was something that you'd have just as a customer of Coinbase, irrespective of whether you staked or not. But all of those arguments, they sounded to me a little bit defensive because they all seemed to presuppose that there was a possibility of loss. If the Ninth Circuit test that we're saying is the right test to use is that the risk of loss is itself enough, then the fact that the risk of loss is really small, could be made up, or it could happen in other circumstances, I'm not sure it gives me a complete answer. Can you help with that?
Thank you for the question. It covers the waterfront really well, and so let me try to take it in a few pieces if I can. Let's distinguish the two buckets, if you will, those that relate to staking in some way and those that don't, because I don't think we would say that the risk is just so small you don't have to worry about it. The risk of loss does not exist on the pleadings and the user agreement before you. The first risk they point to is slashing, Your Honor, this idea that there could be improper validation and the staked assets are slashed. But that same paragraph, 343, acknowledges that it's not a risk that Coinbase stakers face. It doesn't say it's small. It's not a risk that Coinbase stakers face because Coinbase indemnifies for it. Now, they go on to say there's still general risk. I'll just flag for Your Honor that quote in the rest of 343 is from a money transmission disclosure that Coinbase has for New York State, where paragraph 333 of the complaint acknowledges Coinbase does no staking business. So that quote has nothing to do with staking. So there's a discussion about slashing risk. Coinbase indemnifies for it, the allegation acknowledges that risk does not exist. The second risk that's talked about in 341 is a risk of loss while staked because tokens can't be used for other purposes like trading or transfer. Here again, this is just restating a condition imposed by the blockchain that the validators who choose to sign up for this service and perform this service for the blockchain in return for a fee put up collateral while they're doing the service. Think of it something like a security deposit. They're not going to do a bad job. They're not going to make mistakes while they're there. They get it back at the end. There's the allegation of risk that they can't do other things with their collateral, their security deposit. It doesn't state a risk of financial loss that Rivera was talking about in such a manner from your investment. The last two, again, I think Your Honor summarized it very well. 344 and 345 are just not staking risk. They're risks alleged for anyone who holds tokens. Now, the way the SEC frames that as a defensible and sufficient allegation is to say that there's a risk of ownership loss for all token holders, and they don't have to allege more. And I want to tell you why that's wrong, Your Honor, but first, as you saw in the briefing, we do take issue with and dispute that standard of the law. That's exactly what courts have to show is that investors put capital into a business with the risk that its performance may lead to their inability to recover the capital. That's what investing in such a manner to face the risk of loss is, according to Rivera. And, stepping back, here the SEC is charging Coinbase with offering an investment contract through its trading service to have an investment of money that's required for that. There has to be a risk of loss alleged that arises from staking through Coinbase. But even if that's not necessary, and Your Honor says, well, what about their risk of ownership loss? You can see on the slide as you jumped ahead to slide 21, there are no well-pleaded facts here stating a risk of ownership loss over stake tokens. My friends at the front table say that's our say-so. It's the courts say-so over and over again. For a custodial validator like Coinbase, ownership over staked assets is dictated by the contractual agreement between the user and the custodian. You can see in these provisions we've set out for you, Your Honor, this user agreement is crystal clear. Title to staked assets at all times remain with the users. They do not transfer to Coinbase. They don't become property of Coinbase, and they don't become subject to general creditors' claims under any circumstances. And these guarantees are obviously very important that the tokens will be returned. I want to point you to one more source, Your Honor, your colleague Judge Engelmeyer, who recently confirmed this very point that I'm pressing to you as a basis for the inadequacy of this claim. He examined whether title had passed to Coinbase in any respect in the Underwood case, and he granted the motion to dismiss based on the user agreement, finding, quote, the user agreement's terms flatly contradict the allegations that Coinbase holds title to the digital asset. Appendix 4 says the same thing for staking services. They do not affect ownership. Taking that on its face, Your Honor, this is an independent reason why, as a matter of law, the complaint fails to plead the required investment of money bearing a risk of financial loss, and the claim should be dismissed. We think that does resolve the staking claim.
Well, you're saying it's an independent reason, and that's because the first reason is because these aren't securities.
Well, the first reason is there's no investment of money in the capital structure. And second, in any case, there's no risk of financial loss well pleaded in the allegation. The last aspect of staking, Your Honor, if you'd like to discuss it, although mindful of time, I'll respect if you've heard enough about staking for the day. Is the efforts of others that you had some colloquy with our friends from the front table as well.
A little bit of the efforts of others, I guess it seems that there's not necessarily a disagreement between what activities or what services Coinbase is or is not affording to these to folks involved in the staking process, but whether those amount to ministerial or managerial.
For the most part, I think that's right. I'll offer one clarification. You can see on slide 22, we tried to group the various activities from Coinbase that the SEC alleges as efforts of others. The reason I offer an asterisk to that, otherwise description, Your Honor, is the first few categories do not concern Coinbase's activities or those that are alleged to be managerial. The first category, the group of paragraphs, concern general proof of stake activities, not about Coinbase, and so it's not about Coinbase's efforts. The second is about retaining third parties to stake assets. Again, not about Coinbase, not Coinbase's efforts. The third category is about liquidity pools for quicker withdrawal, something that's acknowledged in the complaint is no longer the case in Coinbase staking, but in any event, again, on its face, addresses the administrative convenience of unstaking, of exiting the staking program. It doesn't offer any managerial qualities or otherwise in the conduct of the actual staking program at issue. So those first three, I'll just say, are actually separate. The bottom two are, the remaining efforts the SEC alleges, and quite as Your Honor put it, those just aren't the type of aren't the type of managerial and entrepreneurial efforts required by Howey. They are just the type of clerical and routine functions that courts have found to not suffice to plead the requisite standard, the material, significant impact on returns. That goes for the IT services with software and equipment. That goes for the pooling, where there's an aggregation of tokens to stake. And, we direct Your Honor's attention to the Life Partners case, where what was found to be ministerial, Your Honor, was an almost identical constellation of efforts that was found to have, quote, no material impact on the profits of the investors, including because these were services that, quote, anyone, including the supposed investor, himself could supply these services. And there were a number of others who could as well. So, again, to delve into it further, but we would commend those excerpts from that we put in front of Your Honor from Life Partners to lay bare quite how clear it is as a matter of law that we think the back office, mechanical, outsourced IT services and administration that's alleged in those bottom two categories of paragraphs do not rise to the level of an adequate pleading those efforts of others.
Thank you so much. I think that leaves me with Ms. Eddy and the major questions, Dr. Massetti. One of the discussions I was having with your colleague, Mr. Sabat, was the reconciliation, if there needs to be one, between Coinbase's arguments about the applicability or how it interprets the Howey test and how that works with the argument it's making about the major questions doctrine. So perhaps we could begin there. Could you help me reconcile those two ideas? What I mean in particular is, to the extent that you are arguing that the Howey test applies by its terms, so that's the test I should be using, and that we should be working in that framework rather than suggesting that these particular tokens are outside of that framework. Does that in any way exist in tension with your argument that the SEC's bringing of this case amounts to some sort of arrogation of powers it doesn't have? And I'll ask you, just because I know this court, to grab the microphone and bring it near you. I'm sure we will hear you, but I just know that there's something about those microphones. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I will say, preface this by saying our position is that our interpretation of Howey and our argument about the investment contract and what it requires fortifies the major questions position that we have. In fact, it undergirds the whole thing. We don't think you even get to major questions here because the text and the context and the precedent establish that the position the SEC is advancing here is not grounded in law. But if the court were to disagree and to find plausibility in the SEC's position, that's when the major questions doctrine would kick in, and it would compel rejection of that position. And that's because, as Mr. Sabat, I think, already explained at length, the transactions on Coinbase's secondary exchange are of a different character than anything that the SEC has asserted regulatory authority over before. And they are of a different character than the interpretation the SEC itself has advanced in Howey, in its briefing there. It talked about contractual arrangements, for example. It's different than any position that it's taken in briefing since in some of the briefs that Mr. Sabat highlighted from that court. It's taking a different position than Chair Gensler took in 2021 when he appeared before Congress and asked for regulatory authority to cover transactions on crypto exchanges.
pause you right there for a moment because I want to know the degree to which you're asking me to look at certain allegations in the preface to your answer that, again, to me seem to speak more of a question of optics or not. For example, I can understand Coinbase's frustration that it tried to be helpful. I mean, if that's how it perceives what it was doing. It tried to be helpful. It tried to talk to the commission. It tried to get some guidance. And then, rats, there's an enforcement action brought against it. So I get that. For me, there's a layer of, again, optics that I'm really not considering, at least I didn't think I need to be considering in the context of the major questions doctrine. The fact that you asked for guidance, your client asked for guidance and didn't get it, to me doesn't suggest major questions doctrine. I'm assuming instead I'm looking at a narrower universe of materials, which would be the statements of SEC officials, the higher ups there, and the positions that the commission itself has taken in other cases. Am I correct, or am I also supposed to be looking at everybody's efforts to be helpful?
Your Honor, you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
There is a good portion of the allegations in the preface to our answer that you can properly consider and should consider, not just as optics, but as factors, as going to factors that the Supreme Court has repeatedly identified as relevant. The bevy of congressional activity surrounding this very significant question of how to regulate crypto, and the fact that Chair Gensler made those statements to Congress in 2021. All those facts you can consider and should consider, we submit. And I don't think the SEC disputes that. Those aren't really facts.
I don't think they dispute it. I think what they say is that the Gensler statement's taken out of context, and you disagree. There's quite detailed and yet not not the same result. Everybody has a view of that. I understand that. With respect to the bevy of congressional activity, I thought I understood the argument to be, and it's also presented in some of the amicus briefs, is that the fact that that Congress seeks greater clarity doesn't necessarily mean that the SEC lacks the authority in this space. I appreciate that your view is it does, but I think their argument is we've always had rights to regulate securities, and it may have took us a moment. We may have had stumbled along the way, but we figured out how we could do it. And here we are doing it. As distinguished, I'm not sure it's of a piece, for example, with just to pull something out of the air, like the OSHA vaccine mandate. Whatever your position is on that, I'm not sure that was something that OSHA did on a regular basis. Or the student debt cancellation, I'm not sure that's something done on a regular basis. Here, the commission would argue this is what we do, and yes, the book and the asset may be different because over time different assets develop, but it's really no different in terms of the mode of analysis that we're applying. Why are they wrong? What is it about crypto that makes it so qualitatively different than the other assets or the other putative securities that the commission has considered and regulated over time?
Let me begin by saying that it's not what makes crypto special. It's the nature of the transaction that the SEC is now designating and calling security. That it didn't designate or recognize as a security in any of its prior briefing over sort of the 90-year history of the Exchange Act, in Chair Gensler's comments to Congress. And this is a special kind of transaction. It's one that doesn't have an ongoing legal relationship between the issuer and the purchaser. So that is the class of transaction that is at issue here, and the SEC is offering an interpretation through a campaign of enforcement action that is not just arrogating authority to itself, it is expanding its jurisdictional perimeter. That is, in some sense, it's similar to the Brown and Williamson case, where there was the question was tobacco a drug or a device? Here the question is this class of transaction a security? And that the congressional activity is, we're not saying that's dispositive, but it is something the court can and should consider under the governing precedents in assessing whether Congress has spoken clearly about whether the term security, the term investment contract, can properly be conceived to cover what the SEC is identifying and pursuing here. And I think for all the reasons that Mr. Sabat already gave, there's no clear statement of that kind here. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because it was not the answer I was expecting, which doesn't mean it wasn't a perfectly fine answer. You're saying that what is the thing I should be concerned about is not crypto assets. What are they? Are they securities or are they not? But that the particular transaction that's being challenged, the particular types of transactions that are being challenged, are so different than anything as to which the Commission's asserted authority in its history. Am I understanding that correctly? That is the first part, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I was looking for. And I think that the cases look both at what is the nature of the arrogation of authority, how expansive it is it? And I think that's part one of the answer. The cases also look at what is the impact here, and what is the significance on the practical level of the expansion that the agency is asserting. And that's where we look at the fact that this is an arrogation of authority over an entire industry. And but I'm sorry, the impact, looking at the impact on whom? On both the industry and on the Commission? Because I thought from listening to your colleagues at the front table that one of the issues that was discussed was whether, enforcement went, from something in the tens to something in the thousands or something like that. So am I looking at what this could do in terms of how much it would expand the number of enforcement actions the Commission could bring, or am I looking at it in terms of the crypto industry itself? You're looking at it, Your Honor, I think in both, but it's certainly the latter. And the Commission does try to advance this argument that this is really just routine enforcement action and sort of incremental routine enforcement action. It is certainly true that the complaint here leaves allegations regarding just 12 tokens traded on Coinbase. But it is part of a concerted campaign against crypto exchanges generally. There were other lawsuits filed in close proximity to this one against other crypto exchanges. And it is obvious that if the court were to accept the Commission's definition of investment contract in this case, that would have essentially legislative implications. It would affect the whole industry. And the Commission has kind of made no apologies for this.
Please pause for a second. Two follow-up questions before you move to your next section of argument. I think you're suggesting to me that I need to look at this as sort of it's one enforcement action. It's only 12 to 13 tokens, but heaven forfend, Fela, if you let this in, there'll be nothing. We'll have nothing but enforcement actions against either folks who provide the services that Coinbase provides or crypto asset issuers in the first instance. So I guess when I'm thinking about the impact, am I allowed to think of it, as you suggest, by looking at it not merely as the case before me, but as what that case might portend? Your Honor, and I think it is not just a matter of enforcement. I want to be clear about that too. If the court were to take the SEC's view that the token transactions, trades over Coinbase's secondary exchange, are investment contracts, then the implications of that are that the SEC's regulatory apparatus applies to crypto exchanges. The court can and should take that into account. And I know there's been some suggestion that there's an absence of authority for the proposition that an enforcement action can give rise to the major questions doctrine. And I
I want to just point the court, one of the amici cites this, but it's the Gonzalez case, in which an enforcement policy was at issue. And the major questions doctrine was applied there. Attorney General Ashcroft had issued an interpretive rule construing the Controlled Substances Act to prohibit physician-assisted suicide. And the court held that wasn't a regulation. It wasn't entitled to any deference of any kind. It was an announcement of an enforcement policy, and it applied the major questions doctrine to that. And I think the doctrine applies when the position that the agency is advancing is essentially an encroachment upon Congress's prerogative. That is what's going on here. Congress, 1934, listed out the instruments that qualify as securities. Investment contract is one of them. The SEC has been litigating the contours of investment contracts for decades, never advancing the theory it is now advancing in this case. And that's precisely the sort of circumstance in which the major questions doctrine should be invoked and should be applied.
Okay.
The second argument you make is that accepting their position would have effectively legislative implications. Did I understand that argument correctly?
Yes, I think that's right, Your Honor. The commission deliberately, being that Congress has not acted, has not granted the authority to regulate crypto, has instead taken matters into its own hands. It has gone back and looked into the act from 1934 and said, we have the authority we asked for 2 years ago. That's impermissible. And it's impermissible because there's no clear statement that this kind of transaction fits within the definition of a security, and thus within the Commission's own jurisdiction.
I guess what concerns me is I'm reluctant to focus to view through too narrow a lens what the Commission's enforcement ability is. I think they're telling me it is routine, and you're saying it's not. So I appreciate that. I'm just saying that. I guess another issue is 10 years on the bench. No one has ever said to me major questions doctrine until this case. I understand 10 years is, just a very small drop in the bucket to many judges, but I'm sort of shocked. I've had some interesting cases, and this has never come up. My research into this area does not suggest that it comes up very often, and even less often does it actually get found by a court. So I'm not, I guess my question, and I mean no disrespect to your client, but I'm just not sure the crypto industry is, that it is so major or so extraordinary that I need to find it here. I understand your initial point, which is, well, you don't have to if you just go our way on the other arguments. Yeah, I get that. But I'm saying I have a natural hesitation to involve or to make a finding that something implicates the major questions doctrine because it is so infrequently done. And I'm not sure this is on a par with the student loan forgiveness or with the energy industry. And I know what Brown and Williamson is. Perhaps I might have my own skepticism about the Brown and Williamson decision. I appreciate, of course, that I'm bound by it. But I guess I'd like a little bit of comfort that what you're asking me to do is, here's the tension. You're saying to me, what the commission is doing is so crazy, so beyond what it should be doing, that you need to stop them. My point to you is, it is so infrequently that, and in fact, this is the one case where I've been asked to do that I worry that I am, in my own lane, doing exactly the thing that you're arguing the commission is doing here, which is to take power I don't have, to stop activity I shouldn't be stopping. So that's why I'm asking. I mean, I'm not asking you to hold my hand here, but I'm just saying there's a comfort that I need to have that this isn't as much of a nuclear option as I think it is based on the cases that I've read.
Your Honor, you spoke about your own power and then the concern about stepping outside your lane. And I want to just return to a comment that you made when speaking to my colleagues on the front table about Senator Loomis's brief.
Yes.
The question here is between Congress and the SEC, who has the power to legislate this question? And that's I think, the question that that is central to your inquiry. I do want to note, though, and just make sure the court has in mind, there are a wide variety of circumstances in which the major questions doctrine has been invoked and has been applied. And just
they're two different things, right? Being invoked and being applied. So go ahead.
Well, let's talk about, I guess, the ones in which it's been applied. It's been applied to the elimination of rate publication requirements for 40% of telecom providers in the long-distance business. That's the MCI case. It's been applied to new emissions controls for existing coal mines. So that's West Virginia. It's been applied, the eviction moratorium at issue in the Alabama Association of Realtors case was one affecting 6 to 17 million tenants with a potential economic impact of $50 billion. Let me just pause on that for a moment because there's been some math thrown around.
There's a lot of math.
There's a lot of math. This is not a math question.
Yes.
And none of the cases treat this as a math question or as a question of fixed numbers. It gives a flavor of the significance of the agency's, the impact of the agency's action. Chair Gensler himself, the very day he made the request of Congress for authority to assert regulatory authority over crypto exchanges, prefaced his comment by saying this is a $2 trillion industry. The SEC's complaint, I think paragraph 1, talks about billions of dollars in trades happening every day. The economic impact here could be really and I want to just make a point that hasn't gotten a lot of play here today yet, which is the architecture that the SEC has in place does not work with crypto. That's why my client made a pitch for rulemaking. There is no pathway to registration as it stands right now. So if the SEC's position is accepted, the potential impact of that is potentially crippling. On the other hand, if the SEC,
crippling, or are you about to tell me it's existential?
Or is it existential for
those assets as to which transactions in the assets, however they come about, are investment contracts?
I think it is certainly the impact is vast, Your Honor. And I will return again to the point that the SEC is offering no limiting principle, really, to what it will designate as an investment contract in the absence of a ongoing contractual obligation or something that's conferring a share in the enterprise. So the potential impact is vast. Now, it could go, I suppose, a different way. The SEC could put in place an entire new architecture that would address this. That's the kind of change, though, that the major questions doctrine says should not be effectuated by the agency. That's something that Congress should decide. Those are the kinds of questions that Congress has before it now, and that Congress should have been left to decide, and before the SEC came and took matters in its own hands.
But in fairness, they haven't done anything. So I am a little bit concerned. I have a concern about not recognizing someone's authority to do something in this space. The answer may be that I'm just out of luck until Congress acts, as you would say, Chair Gensler recognized some time ago. But all right, maybe I'll just leave it at that. Okay, thank you. Did I just deprive you of some great thought you wanted me to know about?
I don't believe so, Your Honor, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity later if something comes to mind that
Funny you should mention that. We've now finished our 4th hour of argument, and I congratulate those of you who've stayed and listened through all of this. I have asked the 14 pages of questions I wanted to ask, and I thank you very much.
Summary arguments coming up.
Imagine that if I asked you, you would not forgo the opportunity to say something to me in the vein of a summation, or something I didn't know, something I need to focus on, something I was too dumb to ask you about. So we're going to take another break, and I'm going to ask folks to get together. Mr. Pekin, my thought was that's where you would be coming in and you'd be speaking to that issue. But if there's something else, then tell me now, because you were designating cleanup. So what is it?
I was responsible for correcting errors. None were made. There's nothing for me to contribute.
I do appreciate the love, the back to the Haveto Center. I still think you should make a point to speak, but that's just me.
You know, Your Honor, this is the longest I've been silent for in my entire life.
I'm not going to disagree. Okay, so take 10 minutes, think small thoughts, just something really summary that you want me to know that I'm not going to get from our argument, which I promise you I will reread the transcript of, and from the briefing. And just in case there's something we didn't cover and we should have, that's your opportunity. It should not, let's say 5-10 minutes max.
All right, guys. Well, it looks like they're taking a break here. So let's get back in and start talking about some of the comments.
All right. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So hopefully you guys can hear us well. Let us know if we're okay on that end. Sometimes when we go off of that audio back onto this one, we can have some issues. I think we're good, right?
You can hear me?
Good. Yeah, I got you.
I'm hearing the echo, so it's like that button on your end. The echo cancellation.
There we go. That should be good. Okay. So we're taking a look at the charts, guys. Bitcoin 42.5. I mean, I think this is just a steal right now, to be honest. Yesterday, guys, we were at to put this in reference. I mean, yesterday we were at 43.5. We're down to 42.5 simply because I think people were afraid of today, what was going to come. After listening to this, first off, it doesn't have to do anything with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's won already. I mean, so you're basically getting $1,000 discount right now on Bitcoin. That's just my 2 cents there. But altcoins are kind of hanging in the balance. We've been looking at Coinbase stock. Same thing there. Not too much to really dive into there. I mean, this most recently was what was discussed. By the way, they're getting ready for their summary judgment, so that's why we're not listening in. If you guys are just checking in, smash the like button for us. We should just cross over 200 likes. I want to get that thing up as high as we can. Thanks to everybody who's listening in too. But Judge Valia, who again, not new to crypto, asking an important question here a moment ago. What is it about crypto that makes it so qualitatively different to the other putative securities the commission has regulated over time? And Coinbase lawyer, who was that woman you heard talking there in the last 10 minutes or so, it's not what makes crypto special. It's the nature of the transactions that the SEC is now designating and calling a security. This is a special kind of transaction, one that doesn't have an ongoing legal relationship between the issuer and the purchaser. And the SEC is offering an interpretation through a campaign of enforcement action that is not just designated authority to itself, but expanding its jurisdictional perimeter. And we've known that about the SEC. And I think it all comes back to this big thing for me, Mark. It's Coinbase went public in 2021. They're a publicly traded company on the stock market, and they've never had full clarity and full transparency from the SEC and what's right, what's wrong, how should they do it, how should they not do it. This is what Brian Armstrong has been battling with and fighting against for a while. And now here you have it. They drop the hammer down and just arbitrarily, say that, hey, we're going to call out these 13 assets on your platform. And by the way, you're staking. We got a bunch of issues with that. And I think it's pretty apparent that the judge here in this case, I think she's on the side of Coinbase right now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me. I kind of said something during the chat when we're muted, but it's kind of coming off more so. It's like maybe she's not in favor of crypto, but it's more so she's just not in favor of what the SEC is doing. So it's coming off that way. I just don't think there's enough. It's a witch hunt. I think she recognizes that, and I think all of these arguments that we're hearing are not going to have any impact on how she already feels, in my personal opinion. That's just kind of my take on listening to this and reading some stuff before we went live. It's just kind of, and then how she responded to the major questions doctrine being invoked, and it's just, it's not. I'm not a lawyer, but I do have a little bit of background when you do things like that, and it's just she's just not seeming to want to make something set in stone with what is being presented. Like, you know what I mean? She doesn't think either party necessarily should have just an overwhelming victory. She just doesn't think there's anything there. That's kind of what I'm leaning at, what I'm kind of interpreting it as, is there's no true feeling one way or another outside the fact that she doesn't feel that the SEC's case is the end-all be-all voice when it comes to crypto. I think she feels that crypto is kind of right.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think she's definitely not, saying that it's definitely not coming off that she's like all in on crypto, but I think you're right. It's just the arguments here are weak for the SEC. I'll let you let us know too if we want to chime back into the summary judgment. I can't hear that.
It over.
Okay,
But
just
right
you
now,
tell me.
We're gonna take like 10 minutes or so. So when I get a first glimpse, I'll stop us and go live with that.
Okay. In the meantime, guys, go ahead and smash the like button. If you're watching on Mark's channel, it's NYFC Capital. If you're watching here, go ahead and hit that like button. Let's get up over 300 likes for the first time today. I know we're up over 200 likes. Let's get up over 300 viewers. That's what I was trying to say. 300 viewers. We're really close, knocking on the door. Help us by doing that. Drop your thoughts in the chat. We want to interact with you, and we want to hear from you. But if you guys are just checking in, these 13 tokens, a lot of people pointed to these 13 tokens. Are these the only ones in question? The answer to that is no. I just want to keep highlighting this because I think it's an important point. I've seen a lot of discussion around this today. These are just, and this was said by the SEC side today, these are just 13 tokens that were listed by the SEC that they say they've done thorough research into, and they're listing them as securities based on the fact that they have an ecosystem, centralized authorities, and people on the team, most oftentimes founders, got basically a private investment. Okay. So that's their argument. That is basically their summary judgment, if you will, on that side of it. I'm curious to hear kind of how they put a bow on all that. Richard says, my interpretation was the SEC's overstepping Congress's footprint that they need to do, and they should be backing off and let Congress take care of this. It's a good point. I don't think this is the SEC's place. Boca says the SEC under Gary has been losing in court a lot. Al Clark chiming in says the CFTC are going to end up leading regulating crypto, not the SEC, who are on their last legs. Shib Army says it's called bullying. The SEC will lose. This will be thrown out. John chiming in a few different times today. Fire Gary Guzler. There you go. He's been very adamant about that. Blah, blah world says, what will happen to Matic after Polygon moves to V2 Paul? I don't think fundamentally anything. I'll tell you what about Polygon, blah, blah world. I've been severely disappointed in Polygon lately. I really have been. I thought it would do a lot more, but it's not going to change my opinion on where I think they can go and what they've done here to bridge the gap from Web 2 to Web 3. But I've been disappointed in terms of the price action. It's kind of sucked. I mean, considering you've had a lot of these other cryptos like Cardano, like Solana, really perform well the back half of 2023. So we'll see what happens with Polygon. It did have a weird run, though, in the middle of the bear market in 2022 and 2023, a couple different runs. So, it's not that far off its all-time high. So maybe that had something to do with it. But wondering that, too. I've got a Matic bag. I don't think anything happens in terms of the move. I think it's, people who like Polygon are still going to like Polygon. They've been pretty upfront about why they're making the move. It's better for their longevity and the tokenomics. And I don't, it doesn't change my thoughts, my opinions. Does that move change your feelings on Polygon?
No, there's really nothing there's no action in it, in one way or another. Like the people that I feel like it would bother or influence, like I feel like everybody's kind of just so neutral on it.
Yeah, I think the one thing about Polygon that's been interesting to this point is they've really never figured out that way to really gain a big community yet, Mark. I think that's the one knock. It's the one knock on Polygon.
Yeah, I mean, look at the list. Like, I mean, you can go down the list. It's what's kind of funny too is like Solana too. Really is kind of what I've noticed with my coverage and whatnot is it's kind of like a glass half full as well for how big they've gotten, how much success they've had. But like some of those on that list, I mean, they are diehard communities, but like we just don't have those Matic fanboys or girls in the fold. But for sure, to your point with this witch hunt, if you will, some of these crypto, I mean, you could take away the commonalities within this chase, right? And it seems to be the number one thing that they're using is that figurehead. I think that's like a lot of these cryptos have like a CEO, if you will, like they have that representative, and they have that more corporate structure where they're like looked at as more of a company. And a lot of it has, it's just weird. They all kind of cluster together. They have that VC backing in a way. Cardano is the one where it kind of really, I don't know how they're obviously doing stuff to get away from those designations, but you can see how they're slowly adapting and it's part of their roadmap, but it's just interesting how they all basically started out. You see like this move, it's more of a trend within crypto and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a lot of cryptos that have to start out as a more of a security, right? And then they kind of that roadmap is more so to become decentralized. And I don't wonder if that's truly because that's what they want to do as a crypto, or if it's because they just are trying to duck the authorities and become more of a commodity. And I think it really makes you wonder, like, what would be going on actually if we didn't have the SEC, right? If we didn't have this, which I like, how much VC money, how crazy could it really be getting in crypto? Would we see coins such as Cardano, Matic? Would they not be neutral? Would they not be dull? Would they have insane pumps because it's all holds bar? Or are these truly being suppressed by the SEC? It's kind of interesting to go down that avenue. And, we always talk about it. Like, you have to know, like, literally both sides of the argument. I mean, in some form or fashion, as investors, is the SEC kind of acting on our behalf a little bit, in some situations? Is this argument, is this necessarily a bad thing what they're doing? Obviously it's not good. I mean, they want to shut down exchanges, they want to take, get rid of basically every altcoin known to mankind. But it's weird. It's just weird. And you said earlier, like Dogecoin, Shiba Inu, some of the meme coins, they're on the list. They're not on the list. So it's kind of what it comes down to, and what actually what is actually their goal? I think maybe we need to be asking different questions instead of just assuming Gensler's out there just for blood. Like maybe it's for our protection. Maybe there is, that's not FUD or any stretch of imagination, but if we take off the reins and we just let, the VC pour into crypto, especially the ones on this list, because they are heavily involved in the past. I mean, you can't deny that. If that were to, was basically the theme across the board and that went down, I mean, I don't want to get wrecked. So, maybe we need to take a more kind of holistic approach at all this and realize what is actually, like, maybe we need to listen to both arguments, like the judge. Because I think it goes more so it's going to have more of an effect than just these 13 tokens that are listed in this argument.
Yeah, and it's important to note these are just 13 examples that were outlined here by the SEC. They went into Chili's token a lot earlier, CHZ token. That's the partnership with Socios. You guys have seen that they've worked with some big time NBA teams already, big time Premier League teams. That is the fan token, if you will, the fan token ecosystem. Now, what the SEC representative said about that was that they just pretty much plastered right on their website, just bold face, like, here you go, right out there. Here's the percentages that are allocated to the founders. So maybe these are ones that were just quote unquote easy for the SEC to deem securities and open up this lawsuit, right? And it's the ones where, but I mean, you can't really say that for Cardano, though. And that's what's weird, right? Because somebody made the point earlier, like John right here, there was no Cardano ICO, at least not in the United States. There was an airdrop onto a distribution, and then thousands of people who never met each other traded ADA on exchanges and used Cardano for their projects in Japan. So, I mean, what's the reason here? Did they just go after Charles Hoskinson because he's a centralized figure? Knowing that he's also a billionaire, they're probably like, hey, he probably profited from this. So I think these 13, I don't know if it's all the same here. It's weird that they've picked these 13. We'll just have to see how this plays out. So far, I think the arguments are weak. J-Boy says, do you think when the feds pivot, will it crash stocks and crypto? I don't necessarily think we're going to see a crash. I think 2024 is going to shape up to be really good for crypto. How it's going to shape up to be for stocks, I don't know 100%. But I would think in an election year, they're going to prop things up, right? I mean, they don't want the stock market in shambles coming around, the later half of Q4 or getting into Q4. I think it's going to end up being a good year. I think it's going to be a lot of choppiness here early. It hasn't been a great start for the stock market here to start 2024. For crypto, it's been, okay. But I think 2024 is shaping up to be a great year with the halving coming up and just kind of where we are in this cycle. I'm going to pull something up, Mark. I want your 2 cents here. And again, just jump in if they're going to start talking again. If we want to switch back over to that, let me know. Oh, you're muted.
So here, I'm going to flip it.
Sale between what I'll say two of us here at this table was a violation of the act. All of those cases focused entirely on the issuer's conduct, but all of those cases, Ripple included and Library, all of them, they sold also on these platforms, right? And Judge Barbadoro found no meaningful distinction, neither did Judge Rakoff in Terraform, find any meaningful distinction between an issuer selling on the platform and in what Judge Torres calls blind bid-ask transactions, or selling them more or less directly through these, one-on-one meetings. And the reason that matters to us, Your Honor, is because, again, the cases are different in the cause of action. Our perspective is they're identical in terms of the test that applies. And we think Coinbase is trying to create a different Howey test for when the people at this table might sell the tokens to each other on its platform, and when Terraform might sell its tokens on Coinbase's platform. And we think that's just wrong, Your Honor. And actually, Coinbase did the court a favor. They put some of our briefs there, and if the court does in its spare time look at the briefs, our briefs and the defendant's briefs, they're actually remarkably quite similar. A lot of them talk about these contractual obligations. And so our perspective is it's the same test. The fact that it's an issuer selling it on the platform, or that two people are reselling it amongst themselves, does not materially alter the outcome. And why does this even matter for this case is that there was a lot of conversation about the asset hub, but the key sentence in paragraph 65 of our complaint, Your Honor, is actually the last one, which Coinbase, I believe, admits, or at least qualifies. And what we say there is that Coinbase does not restrict issuers from selling its tokens on these platforms. And they admit that Coinbase permits them subject to certain restrictions to create customer accounts and engage in second primary transactions. So if Judge Rakoff is correct, then that's the end of this motion to dismiss, given that admission in paragraph 65. Now, to be fair, to be clear, we focused it on sort of use Solana and these tokens because, again, we don't view a distinction between the issuer selling, Coinbase calls engaging in secondary market transactions on the Coinbase platform. That's a reference to the exchange, not asset hub. And again, people at this table selling amongst themselves. So that's the clarifying point. I'll now move into a brief summation of the court's indulgence. So the parties agree,
Very weak.
I think,
Very
Your
weak.
Honor, that this case is there's some modicum of agreement. Where we part ways with Coinbase, at least for purposes of this summation, is as to what Howey requires. We think they're making up a new test, and we believe that our position is the one that's most faithful and consistent, but in fact compelled by the Howey test. It's not just a plausible reading as they claim it is. And one phrase I would like to leave the court with that was not discussed a lot today, that I would like to have in the court's mind before we leave, is economic reality. Economic reality is part of the analysis that Mr. Costello was offering earlier, and that I believe is completely devoid from Coinbase's arguments, and that provides part of the limiting principle, including the court's concern about a floodgate of private actions. And so I'd like to borrow from a rhetorical question that the Chief Justice asked in the Biden versus Nebraska case. Would the Congress that enacted this regulatory structure be surprised that the Commission is bringing this action? We know they created the Commission. We know they said to securities exchanges, you got to register. We know they gave the Commission the power to sue if someone violated this command. So the answer to whether they would be surprised depends. Coinbase, we know, does not dispute for purposes of this motion that they are an exchange. The answer to the question depends on what are they exchanging. Coinbase and the amici suggest that we're suing the supermarket, that we've sued Whole Foods. And I concede that if we have sued Whole Foods, we should lose. But economic reality makes it quite plain that our lawsuit and these transactions and these assets are of a quite different nature than if I were suing someone for intermediary transactions in bananas or other items that they've used in their examples. What is at issue here, and let's just imagine this in the eyes of the Congress of 1934, it's an exchange, in fact, that's conceded for purposes of this motion. The exchange permits buyers and sellers, they get them together, and they trade in these assets. What are these assets as a matter of economic reality? There are issuers also in this marketplace, and these issuers are saying, and in 1934, there's no crypto, so what they have maybe is just a piece of paper with numbers. That's all that is, and that doesn't do anything. It represents what these investors are buying. And the issuers say, give us all your capital. Give us your capital. We're going to take this capital, and with this capital, we're going to make these little pieces of papers with numbers valuable. And you'll be able to resell them, and you'll make some money. And the exchange, again, the conceded exchange also permits people to buy and sell amongst themselves, these same little pieces of paper. And everybody knows, because these issuers in 1934 have flooded all the then available methods of communication. They bought radio ads, they put in the paper, they sent glossy mailers, and they said, this is what we're going to do. Because I have to explain to you what these little pieces of paper do. They're not bananas. Let me explain to you what's going to happen with them. After I take your funds and deploy those funds into this ecosystem, you're going to make some money. And the other thing the issuers remind everyone of consistently is, and I'm going to keep a big stash myself, because when they go up in value, I'm going to make money too. So the reasonable investor in 1934 understands that what they're buying into is an investment contract. Would the Congress of 1934 be surprised if we asked that this exchange register? I submit to the court that the answer is plainly no. If the response were, well, yes, you're right, SEC, but the issuers were clever enough, and not to use a magical word like impressions of an offer of contractual obligation, or were clever enough to not reduce into writing the promises that they've made, therefore this is Whole Foods, I submit to the court that the Congress of 1934 would not only be surprised, but actually stunned that there would be such an easy workaround to the carefully constructed regulatory structure that they created. in 1933 and 1934 around the capital markets. So we are asking that the court not endorse such an outcome, Your Honor. We are simply asking that the court look at the economic reality, apply the Howey test as it was written. And to end on a major questions point, we believe that the Howey test is there precisely, as I said, to give effect to that congressional purpose and to set it aside or add elements sort of Coinbase is really asking the court to do is what really would create violence to the statutory structure. For those reasons, Your Honor, we ask that Coinbase's motion be denied in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one moment, please.
Kind of really dodged.
All right, I think we're going to be back here for a little bit.
Just to clarify, for there were some people asking. So who was that? Who was that?
Not at all. Thank you. No, you've helped me more than I helped you in any way, but thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me start here. I think after all of it, after our 4.5 hours, after hearing from our friends at the table in front, the SEC still has not alleged, it doesn't contest, doesn't argue that the issuer of any of the 12 tokens that it challenges in this complaint made any statement that could be interpreted as a contractual obligation, still less any kind of promise or obligation that traveled with any of the 12 tokens at issue when they were sold in blind transactions on the secondary market. We heard a little more about paragraph 65 of the complaint, and I don't want there to be any confusion on that. That paragraph allows that promoters, like everyone else, can make trades on the platform of tokens that have already been issued. It does not involve primary transactions. It is purely secondary transactions. That's what paragraph 65's last sentence is about, and for the reasons we've talked about, nothing in the allegation of this complaint gives rise to any allegation regarding any primary transaction or initial coin offering. And the fact that there are no promises of any kind that travel in any of these transactions, we think is fatal to the complaint. I want to talk just a bit more about Howey, because it's an important case. And I don't know if it's the alpha and the omega. I don't know if it's the beginning and the end, but I don't think there's any mistake about it. Howey is where we start. And the promoter, they're just talking about economic reality. The promoter there was a company. It sold parcels of land and a commitment to do stuff on that land, 2 contracts. The question before the court was whether those 2 contracts can be stapled together. If the answer was yes, it would be an investment contract. If the answer was no, there wouldn't be. An asset plus an obligation. That is what all the blue sky law said an investment contract was. That's what Howey said it was. Now, the commission has argued in its papers, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this when we were talking earlier, that Howey's obligation to develop the orange business was what it called purely incidental. It does this, the commission does, by plucking those words purely incidental, rather obviously out of context in Howey itself. The sale of the land, the asset sale, was what the court called purely incidental. The management contract, the contractual obligation to develop the business, that was the opposite of incidental. It's what made the arrangement a security. There's no way to read that opinion and not understand it. You can even read Justice Frankfurter's very short and completely overlooked dissent, and it'll tell you the same thing. There is no doubt that what made the 2 contracts there, an investment contract, was that the asset was stapled to an obligation to manage. The cases, one after another, teach the same lesson. I won't rehearse them all. I will also refrain from undue counterfactual historiography as to the question of what the congressmen and women of 1933 and 34 would have thought about this, but I'll tell you this. I think there would have been a lot of surprise to find that an investment contract didn't have anything to do with a contract at all. And that is the position that's being sponsored here, that the very words of that statute are being elided or erased from it completely in derogation of all the case law that preceded it and all that has followed. I'll also say, I think it would come as a surprise to Senator Loomis that this was obviously something that was to be regulated. I won't cause the court to look at it, but slide 12 recounts about, I don't know, maybe a dozen and a half statutory initiatives over the past 2 years where Congress is trying to figure out who crypto should be regulated by and how. I think there's an awful lot of surprise, historical and present, about the willy-nilly arrogation of regulatory authority that the SEC purports to assert by virtue of this action. Part of the trouble with the position the Commission here sponsors is that we wish to insist that there has been no showing of necessary limiting principle. We talked about this a little bit, Your Honor. I want to push on it because it won't do to say an asset plus promotional statements is enough. And it won't solve that problem to say, well, you're buying into an ecosystem. I am advised that there is an Apple Plus documentary about Beanie Babies that talks at great length about the
Just don't make me watch it.
I thought about it. Makes perfectly clear the communities that grew up around it. And it's true of all sorts of things that people buy and sell. The buying into a community. It is an absolutely vacant limiting principle. It's no limiting principle at all. The point is further illustrated by the acknowledgement, the concession that Bitcoin is a commodity, not a security. Bitcoin has every bit the ecosystem of these other tokens. There are community groups, there are chat groups, there are validators, there are support groups. Bitcoin is an ecosystem just like all of the others. And that won't do as a limiting principle as the Commission's own actions, we think, make clear. On the other branch of our argument, whether the investment needs to be in an enterprise, I just want to make sure to call to the court's attention what Howie said. Because Howie didn't use the idea that the investment contract had to be what they called shares in an enterprise. Idly. That's from the Supreme Court, 328 U.S. at 299. That's Howie. And it's not for nothing that Judge Boudin talked about in finding and discussing investment contracts that what was purchased in this case was not a share of a business enterprise, and so not a security. These cases haven't addressed this issue, because this issue is new, but they address the principle at issue here, which is when does an investment in an asset become an investment in an enterprise? And the answer is clear in case after case. It is at the moment where the asset is stapled to a contractual undertaking that gives an interest in the enterprise. Let me close with just a word or two more on secondary markets, because I think the following can be fairly said. The Commission's complaint draws the court into truly unprecedented territory. To call these secondary market transactions investment contracts when there's no contract is atextual, and it's ahistorical, and it's unprecedented. There has been no finding of any kind, any court, that a transaction on the secondary market gives rise to an investment contract, and that is not a coincidence. Echoing the conversation, Your Honor, that you and I had a little bit ago, investment contracts, well, they're contracts after all, and that implies privity. And absent unusual circumstances that haven't eventuated in the decided cases, circumstances that one could imagine, but nevertheless aren't alleged here, contractual obligations could travel so as to create an investment contract. No allegation here. And what we say you can't have, what we say would make a hash of the statute is an investment contract without at least the appearance of an offering. And that is completely not alleged in this case. And there was reference.
Can I hear that again, please? You cannot have an investment contract without at least the appearance of an offering?
You can't have an investment contract without at least the appearance of an offering of an instrument that carries with it the contractual obligation.
Thank you.
Well, we're talking.
What do you mean by appearance of? At least the appearance of? it's a strange simulacrum that you're suggesting. I want to know I guess you're just trying to cover all bases. I just want to know what that means. It's the word appearance that's right.
And it's fair enough. And what we're trying to convey here, Your Honor, is an attitude towards this instrument that is not ungenerous, but generous towards the Commission. If there is an instrument that is meant to convey a contractual obligation, that is an offering of an instrument that is meant to convey that will satisfy the securities laws. But it has to partake in the appearance or offering or intent to create a contractual obligation. Otherwise, you do not have an investment. You just have an investment. So it's got to be stapled to something that, from an objective standard, could constitute the offering of a contract in the mind of a reasonable offer. I wanted to very quickly just mention the Dow report because it came up earlier and it bears a little bit on this because it's the kind of instrument that one can imagine fulfilling some of the characteristics that aren't fulfilled in the pleadings. But what I wouldn't want left is the impression that the Dow report put anyone on notice of what was going on here. Here's what the Dow report said. The Dow token was like, and I'm quoting now, buying shares from the SEC. The token was like buying shares in a company and getting dividends because block token holders could vote to distribute the Dow's anticipated earnings from the projects it funded. That was the Commission's conception in 2017. Notice its language. It has all the earmarks, not just of what we're saying today. And of course, we're litigants, so you'll be skeptical of us. We have a position. It has all the hallmarks of all the cases that have been saying for 100 years. 2017, you had an instrument that was buying shares, that had the possibility of getting dividends, that had voting rights, and therefore had an interest in the enterprise in a manner that at least resembled other securities. That's what the Dow report was about. And we're 180 degrees away from that point. Now, in fact, no court has ever held that something without those sorts of attributes can be traded on a secondary platform and be a security. Finally, I want to say this, and then I'll... Now, Coinbase appreciates the utility and the wisdom of sound and predictable regulation in the crypto industry as in elsewhere. The court should know that Coinbase is subject to many regulatory regimes, state regulatory regimes, the CFTC. It's not as though there is no regulator with any authority beyond the SEC. And Coinbase has made clear in this case, in its public statements about the SEC, that it's looking for rules of the road. And we know the SEC has a broad mandate to regulate things that are securities. But the SEC's regulatory reach does not go beyond securities. And it's permitted to regulate here. It's permitted to regulate everywhere. And it could do so in after-the-fact enforcement actions, with or without notice, with or without warning. And that is not the way administrative law is supposed to work. The SEC knows, Your Honor, that it's trying to squeeze crypto transactions into a statutory movement to available law. That's the significance of the Chair Gensler remark. That's the significance of the Hinman report. That's the significance of Dow. There's an understanding that they don't fit. We know Congress is trying to sort it out. And what should happen here is the SEC should follow enforcement and rulemaking actions that make sense of the statutory language, that does not twist it upside down, that does not read the word contract out of the word contract, that harmonizes rather than does violence to all of the cases that have come before. And this is several bridges too far. And for that reason, we really urge the court to grant the motion.
Wow. Strong.
All right, guys, did you get all that?
Here comes Beanie Baby Inu. Going to be launching
Yes,
soon off on Uniswap. But yeah, crazy stuff. I mean, it was pretty good overall. I do want to kind of just end the stream with just some bullish things. I thought overall this was bullish for crypto. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Mark? And I want to show something about the halving. I'll show that before we close it out.
Here's the deal, guys. What what I take of it too is that we've watched this over and over and over again, right? This is one of the only times I can remember that where I feel like it was 2-on-1 and not 1-on-2 in a sense. Like I kind of feel like the SEC had their back up against the wall in these arguments more so than the crypto world. And that's kind of my take. I don't know if she's going to rule today. I mean, obviously, that's probably not going to happen just because technically I know she's on the side of justice, but more so like you got to kind of just understand, like if she would monumentally drop the hammer on the government for that matter, I mean, that would absolutely, I mean, crypto would fly. Like if she just was like, nah, that was a bad argument. I mean, crypto would absolutely fly right now. Like, I mean, you can't, even if that's the way you feel, you just can't do that because in some odd way, I mean, look what happened with inflation and how that's all trickled down. It would still be like too much of a tip. You can't just do it with that much of an impact. So she's going to be cautious with her approach. I bet you it won't come until maybe tomorrow or the day after. It's going to take some time, I think, because I mean, she said she wants to read all the transcripts as well, which for 4.5 hours of transcripts, that's a lot of reading. So, you know,
yeah. This could even take weeks and months. I mean, we don't know exactly. We'll be covering it though on our respective channels for sure. If you guys aren't yet subscribed to Mark's channel, make sure you guys do so. I'm gonna pull that over here right now. There we go. Should be able to see that up there on screen. That is Mark's channel right now. We're live on his channel right now as well. It's getting really close to 4,000 subs. So give him a follow over there. It's at NYF Capital right there over on YouTube, and same handle over on X as well. So if you guys can zoom in on that. Also, just a quick plug. Today, I'm going live on Around the Blockchain. So I'll be over there at 4 p.m. Eastern, coming up about an hour from now. So they'll be live over there. I'm going to be one of the guests over there. So if you guys want to bounce over there and show your support, that'd be awesome. Let's fill the room over there and let them know that we're all pumped up over here for what happened today and what's happening with crypto. But I also want to show you guys this. Again, that's coming up at 4 p.m. on Around the Blockchain. So make sure you guys go over there, give them a subscribe like I just did, and show them some love and come over and hang out with us later. So I want to show Mark you this and everybody this as we kind of get ready to close out the stream, just to kind of give you an idea of where we are right now historically with Bitcoin. Okay. So this is your halving schedule going all the way back since the dawn of time. Okay. You can see it here. This chart goes all the way back to 2011. I know it's kind of a small print there down at that bottom left, but you could see what happened here. So these lines are the halving. Okay. So what you've seen here is this little bit of move before the halving. See right here, little bit of a move before the halving right here. Little bit of a move before the halving right here, and basically a little bit of a move before the halving right here that you guys are seeing. Now, this is a little bit dated. Obviously, we're somewhere up a little bit higher than this, but it says rally incoming, right around April 2024. Historically speaking, the big gains come after the halving, okay? And we get a little bit of a buildup in the 300 to 400 days leading up to the halving, which we saw all of 2023, right? We saw that. But the big blow off tops usually come after the halving. So if history repeats itself, guys, when you really zoom out and you think about this holistically, we are getting really close to seeing the big run as we get closer and closer to the halving. We're around 100 days away. So just keep that in mind. With all of the news that's surfacing day by day, you always want to keep that kind of clear picture in your head that we're getting ready for a big run. So Mark, I don't know if you want to speak on that before we get up on out of here.
Yeah, just kind of crazy. I mean, they look at, Bitcoin compared to some of the other assets out there. I mean, we're over halfway there, guys, over halfway to all-time highs. And, that's kind of important to put in perspective too. A lot of cryptos are 10%, less than 10% from all-time highs. So, it's something very important where you're trying to take a real rounded approach to it. And I mean, some of the predictions people are talking about with Bitcoin, it's truly has the potential for a very strong 2024.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I think it's important to keep all that stuff kind of in check, even amid all the crazy news that's out there. I think overall, this is why we're here and we're bullish long term on crypto for sure. And it's going to be, I think, a really fun year in 2024. A lot to look forward to for sure. This has been an interesting live stream. It's been a good one. Appreciate everybody for listening. Make sure you guys go subscribe to Not Your Father's Capital there, NYF Capital over there on YouTube and Twitter. You're getting really close to 1,000 over on Twitter too. So hopefully we can bump them up over to 1,000 there. Really close, actually, right? Yeah, 986. So 14 people out there. Go ahead and go over there, NYF Crypto over there on X, NYF Crypto, and give him a follow over there. So, Mark, it's been fun, man. Yeah.
Always.
Yep. We'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.
All right.